The Roman Dodecahedron. What if the most literate empire in history made hundreds of something and never once wrote down what it was for? In 1739, the first one came out of the ground. Almost 300 years later, nobody can agree on what it is. There is no Roman book that mentions it, no carving, no painting, no letter from a soldier to his mother. For a people who wrote down everything, their laws, their battles, their bad jokes, that silence is loud. So here is the case. Best counts put it around 130 of these things up out of the soil across Europe, though the exact number is disputed. Every theory anyone has put forward about what they actually are has fallen apart on contact with the evidence, and not a single ancient voice has come down to us with the answer. To understand why that's strange, you have to hold one in your hand. Imagine a small cage of bronze, the size of a teacup. It has 12 flat sides. Every side is a perfect pentagon. In the middle of every face, somebody has cut a clean round hole. Each hole is a different size. Each one connects straight to the empty space inside. At every corner, there are 20 of them, sits a tiny knob, like a little foot to stand it on. The smallest known examples are about as big as a strawberry, the largest about the size of a tennis ball. You can hold one in your palm and turn it over. The bronze is not crude. The faces are precise. The holes are clean. This is not a shape you stumble onto. You have to design it. And here is the strange part. They almost never look used. The bronze isn't worn down at the corners. The holes aren't polished smooth by hands or rope or string. It's as if these things sat on shelves. There are no numbers scratched on them, no letters, no marks at all. Whatever they did it gently. So what was it? To find out, you have to follow them across the map. And the map is the next surprise. Pull back and the map gets even stranger. If you put a pin in every place a dodecahedron has come out of the ground, you get a band of pins across the northern edge of the old empire. Britain, France, Germany, the provinces the Romans called Britannia, Gaul, and Germania. From a wall in northern Britain all the way down to southern France. From Wales in the west all the way to Hungary in the east. More than 30 have come out of Britain alone. Now look where the pins are not. No dodecahedron has ever been found in Italy. Not one. Not in Rome itself, not in any of the great Italian villas, not in the volcanic ash that buried Pompeii. They are not in Spain, they are not in North Africa. They are nowhere around the Mediterranean, the very heart of the empire that supposedly made them. Think about that. An object that everybody calls Roman, made of bronze, almost certainly cast somewhere inside the empire, and not a single one has ever been found in the Romans' own homeland. These were a thing of the edge. They came from the borderlands, where Rome was rubbing up against people the Romans called the Gauls and the Celts. Whatever this object was for, the people who made it lived where the empire ended. And there is another silence on top of that one. Of all the ones we've dug up, only a small handful were found in proper modern excavations where we know exactly which layer of earth they came from. Most were turned up by accident generations ago, with the surrounding evidence lost forever. Which is why, 3 summers ago, in one small field in England, a group of amateurs almost broke the case wide open. It was a 2-week volunteer dig in the East Midlands. Amateurs, not professionals. A small local group called the Norton Disney History and Archaeology Group. They were not even looking for anything in particular. What they pulled out of the soil should not have been possible. A bronze dodecahedron, 8 centimeters tall, weighing about as much as a deck of cards, every face intact, every knob still in place, one of the largest ever recorded. It came up fully intact, in nearly perfect condition. It sits today in a university museum. Here is why it mattered so much. Because it came out of a proper modern dig, archaeologists could see what was buried around it. A datable context, the one thing almost every other dodecahedron in the world is missing. The archaeologist leading the work, Lorena Hitchens, took the find on a BBC documentary and tried to explain to a national audience what we were looking at. And what she had to tell them was the strangest part of all. The cleanest find in nearly 300 years had not solved the mystery. It had deepened it. For the first time, the case had a clean witness, a real chain of evidence, a proper modern excavation. And the witness, when questioned, said only this, that this object, made with this much care, in this much quantity, was being used for something. And whatever it was, the people doing it were still not telling. So the scholars went back to the only ground left to dig, the theories, all of them. Because here is what happens every single time when somebody tries to explain this thing. You think, fine, 12 faces, 12 months. Maybe it's a kind of calendar. Maybe it's a way of measuring time used by soldiers in the field. A 2025 paper by a researcher named Ishihara argues exactly that. The trouble is, where's the dial? Where's the inscription? Where are the markings that say which face is January? There are no numbers on it. There are no letters. So you set the calendar theory aside. You think, fine, the holes are different sizes. Maybe you line them up with a stick at a known distance and you've got a rangefinder, a device for measuring how far away a target is. Last year, an undergraduate at Worcester Polytechnic Institute named Cassandra Zimmerman actually built one and ran the experiment. The trouble is, no Roman writer ever mentions an instrument like this, and the Roman army would have been the loudest about it. You think, fine, look, you can wrap thread around those corner knobs and use it like a spool for knitting a glove. Hobbyists have done it. The gloves come out fine. The trouble is, the biggest dodecahedra are too big to be useful for that, and the smallest are too small, and the bronze is too precious for a knitting peg. There are at least a dozen theories floating around. A weapon, a religious icon, a candle holder, a gaming piece, a philosopher's diagram tied to Plato's geometry. That's a 2025 paper by Leach in the Antiquaries Journal. And just last month, an independent researcher named Greg Lamb published in the Exarch Journal arguing they were molds for forming standardized wax objects, though the case remains contested. Hitchens, Ishihara, Zimmerman, Leach, Lamb, 5 different scholars, 5 different answers, and no consensus in sight. Which forces us, finally, back to the strangest fact of all. Somebody made these, by hand, more than 100 of them, spread over centuries, in dozens of places, with absolute care. A person sat down with a mold and a fire and poured the bronze and waited for it to cool. They broke off the casting, they polished each pentagon, they drilled each hole at exactly the size they wanted. They knew what they were doing. They knew what the object was for. To them, it was as obvious as a hammer. And now, 2000 years later, you can hold one of their objects in your palm, the metal warming to your skin, and you cannot guess what their hands were doing with it. The object outlived the idea. More than 100 of these things have survived. 0 mentions of them did. For an empire that wrote down everything, laws, sieges, tax returns, love letters, complaints about bad bread, to leave behind one whole category of beautiful, expensive, carefully made object with no explanation at all is staggering. It means that whatever they were, the answer was so obvious to the people who used them that nobody bothered to write it down. And then their world ended, and the answer went with them. So the next time you hear that the past has been thoroughly explored, that we know what the Romans got up to, that the important things made it through to us, remember the Dodecahedron. Somewhere out there, almost certainly, there are more of these in the ground, waiting for a plow, or a rainy field, or another 2-week dig by a small group of volunteers. Maybe the next one will be the one that breaks the case. Or maybe it won't. Maybe this is one of those mysteries the past simply doesn't owe us. Because this is the quiet proof that whole worlds can sink. Not just buildings, not just languages. Worlds of meaning, the ordinary, everyday knowledge that everyone in a culture shares so deeply they never write it down. Those are the first things to go when a civilization breaks. And once they are gone, no amount of digging brings them back. Next time on Eralore, another silence. Another object the makers never bothered to explain, because everyone already knew. The question is whether anyone still does. The deeper we dig, the stranger it gets. So stay with us. We'll see you on the next one.